Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. This is Daniel Strauss of Woodruff and Strauss and Politico. I am here today live with Betsy Woodruff. We are taping an episode in replacement of an episode last week, which I was actually really pleased with. I don't know about you, Betsy.
I was definitely pleased with it.
But it was a little too messy.
Yeah, the audio did not work at all. So it would have been a great episode if you like just watching us and not hearing anything. That's what you're interested in. The episode would have been great. Unfortunately, the Blogging Heads overlords decided that
the taping gods. But today is a good day for this because it's a debate night, which means a lot of things shut down, at least on the Democratic side. It's a big debate night. But I want to talk about the GOP side first, Betsy. You had a big story on Paul Manafort.
Yes, I love the story. Me and Tim Mack, double byline story about Donald Trump's sort of new top aide and some of the clients that he represented in the past. So the story's about Paul Manafort. Manafort came onto the Trump campaign within the last few weeks to be kind of the convention guru. He's in charge of wrestling delegates and, making sure people show up at the right time and vote at the right time. A really complex, challenging job, a very important job, given that it's going to be a contested convention. So Manafort's a big deal. He's been on the Sunday shows. On Sunday, he said that Ted Cruz used Gestapo tactics to get delegates to support him. He's emerged quite rapidly as one of the new most prominent faces of the Trump campaign. And of course, people have started writing stories about him, started kind of digging into his past. Manafort worked at the 1976 contested convention, one of the few alums of that convention.
So he's an insider.
So he's a consummate insider. But here's the thing about Manafort that's interesting, is that going all the way back to the Reagan administration days, of course, Manafort was very in with Republican Party politics. And he worked in a number of firms, but one of the firms he was in was a lobbying firm where he worked alongside Roger Stone and Charlie Black. Charlie Black is now working for Kasich, or now supports Kasich, as well as, I think, a Democratic operative. Manafort was also on a political consulting firm where it was Manafort, Roger Stone, and Lee Atwater. And we started sort of going through who some of his lobbying clients were, and found quite quickly that Manafort has lobbied for some of history's greatest monsters. For example, the first and foremost example would be Jonas Savimbi, who was a warlord in Angola. Savimbi was responsible for leading the UNITA militia that was trying to wrest control of the Angolan government from Marxist army that was active there. The Cubans supported the Marxists, so the United States policy was, well, Savimbi's killing commies, so he's on our side, so we're Team Savimbi. That was America's foreign policy. And Manafort played a really large role in helping legitimize Savimbi in DC culture. Savimbi paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for this contract for Manafort to sort of introduce him to lawmakers, bring him around town, get him booked on 60 Minutes. I think he got him booked on Nightline. Manafort also lobbied for the federal government to spend more money supporting Savimbi and supporting his militia, just giving them more money, giving them more weapons, etc., helping make them more powerful as a militant group. Now, the interesting thing about Savimbi is he was kind of uniquely horrible. He recruited a lot of child soldiers.
Right.
He kidnapped girls and made them sex slaves for his militia. He put landmines in schoolyards. His use of landmines resulted in one of the world's largest population of amputees. A lot of people in Angola are missing limbs because of Savimbi's high comfort level with using landmines.
High comfort level with using landmines. That's a keeper phrase. I like that one.
Yeah.
Betsy. All right.
Just really atrocious stuff. And the really interesting thing about Manafort's connection to Savimbi is there was a Spy magazine article, I believe it was either from the early 90s or late 80s, probably the early 90s, and this article basically made the case that Manafort actually worked to make the Angolan Civil War go longer. God damn it! I have my article open on my screen, and the video started playing. Anyway, this Spy magazine article made the case that Paul Manafort actually made, or actually tried to make, the Angolan Civil War last longer than necessary because Manafort was making so much money off Savimbi and didn't want to lose him as a client. There's an excerpt from Bill Bradley's autobiography that kind of makes a similar point. Bill Bradley, of course, is a Democratic U.S. senator, a former presidential candidate. Bradley says, but he basically credits Savimbi's lobbying team with making the war go longer. He says, when Gorbachev pulled the plug on Soviet aid to the Angolan government, of course the Soviets were helping the Marxists in Angola, Bradley says, we had absolutely no reason to persist in aiding Savimbi. But by then, he'd hired an effective Washington lobbying firm, which successfully obtained further funding. Congressional aides told Spy magazine that Savimbi himself wanted a ceasefire but Manafort didn't want the ceasefire, so Manafort kept lobbying for more weapons to go to Angola. It's just the most Machiavellian shit. Like, it's just astonishing. So it's an interesting story.
Did you get a sense that the Trump campaign was aware of any of this beforehand? And this is even more timely because Manafort's been hiring deputies, and one big name deputy to Washington insiders, such as Politico's newsroom knows very well, Rick Wiley, the former campaign manager for Scott Walker, who took much of the blame for various unwanted aspects of Walker's short-lived presidential campaign.
Various public relation complications.
There's a lot. There's a lot going around on Rick Wiley.
I know, matter of time. Here's the thing about Manafort: is everyone knew he had this lobbying history. The information that we have is all public record. It did not take a significant amount of time on Google and Nexus and Google Books to rope this whole thing together. We put the piece together in about a day, me and Tim. It was not super complicated. What our piece does that hadn't been done previously is lay out the worst of the worst and lay out the specific involved connections that Manafort had to the worst of the worst. So there have been a number of pieces where it's like, oh, by the way, Manafort lobbied for dictators with human rights problems, or, oh, Manafort's controversial. Here's a paragraph listing 2 or 3 people he lobbied for. But thus far that we've seen, we haven't seen somebody say, Manafort is Trump's new deputy, Manafort is criticizing Ted Cruz of using Gestapo tactics. Guess what? Manafort knows a goddamn lot about Gestapo tactics because he supports people who torture political dissidents. And then we just went through and cataloged. One case that I found particularly striking was that of Sani Abacha in Nigeria, a brutal despot who was responsible for a significant amount of torture. And in 2000, John McCain's presidential campaign hired one of Manafort's partners at a different lobbying firm. This firm was Davis, Manafort, and Friedman. He hired one of his partners to himself, but I believe it was Davis. And when reporters approached the Reagan campaign and said, I hired a guy who worked for Sani Abacha, what's campaign, or the McCain campaign, this is 2008, told reporters, yeah, you got me? My camera's cracked. Anyway, the McCain campaign told reporters, well, no, the Nigeria account was handled by Davis's partner, Paul Manafort. So here's a fun thing about Nigeria. In 1997, 3 years before the Reagan campaign hired Manafort's partner, here's a little excerpt from the State Department report on Sani Abacha's regime in Nigeria. Detainees frequently died while in custody, and there were credible reports that security officers seeking to extract confessions regularly beat suspects, detainees, and convicted prisoners. Security officers tortured prisoners with whippings, suspension by the limbs from the ceiling, burning with candles, and extraction of teeth. So that was one of the clients that Manafort.
So this is Paul Manafort. This is the vanguard of the repair team for Donald Trump's campaign.
Yes. This is Trump's fixer. This is Trump's crisis manager. As deep experience working with.
I think you need to we need to also lay something that's kind of obvious to us, that his specialty is delegate math, right? So he was brought in initially, although he's sort of building out his own team, but he was brought in initially to build his own team and sort of be prepared for a contested convention, because he's one of the last active GOP operatives who has been around for that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting dude, Betsy.
Super interesting. And I mean, we didn't even have space in the article to write about all the horrible folks that Manafort and Roger Stone consulted for. At the end, we have this paragraph where it's like, by the way, here's a couple other guys we didn't have time to write about because our article was like already 2,000 words and we ran into our deadline. It's crazy. I mean, somebody should write a book about this lobbying firm.
So I mean,
it's just the most fascinating.
I was talking to actually Lindsey Graham's former campaign manager a little while ago about operatives who go off and like this is not unusual. They go off to other countries and do consulting and advise and that sort of stuff.
Right.
Recently.
Right.
This
not
seems
weird.
like an extreme case. You know, like some of the Obama people they did Israel, I think.
Yep.
Bibi's election, and you know, this is not unusual. This is
right. It's not unusual at all for American political operatives to work for foreign candidates, and it's not totally unheard of for American political operatives to work for bad foreigners. Like it's still news, in our opinion, especially given the number and the level of the bad of these guys. But yeah, but you're right. Like, you're right. Like, this is not unheard of.
No, this is an extreme case, and it's always news if it's an extreme case.
Well, and the other thing that stood out to me when I was working on this is that the Center for Public Integrity did a fascinating report in what year? In 1992. Yeah. Unfortunately, they don't do these reports anymore. They only did it one year. But the report they did in 1992 was called The Torturers Lobby. And what they did was cataloged which American lobbying firms made the most money by representing foreign governments with horrible human rights records. And Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly was one of the top lobbying firms on their list. So they tracked down how much money these lobbying firms made from regimes that violated human rights. And then they sort of collated it and showed how much U.S. aid went to these regimes, thanks in large part to their lobbyists. Of course, it's always a remarkable return on investment. These countries get way more in U.S. aid than they spend on these lobbying firms.
How much money did Manafort make? Do you have a ballpark?
From 1991 to 1992, Manafort's whole firm, so the four principals, made $3.3 million from the so-called Torturers Lobby. So that's 1 year, $3.3 million in 1992. Of course, that's more than 20 years ago, so adjusted for inflation, significantly larger number in 2016 dollars. And of course, that was going on for years. He's been making money from dictators for many years. So I don't have a ballpark of the total that Manafort and his firms have made over his entire career from these guys. That's information that is gettable. You could find that information, but it would take a long time. It'd be really labor intensive. It'd be a lot of math.
So it sounds like an attack ad for the general election in the Clinton. Just like laying out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and like to be fair, it's interesting. Ted Cruz's campaign manager Jeff Rowe is known for his very hardball and oftentimes controversial tactics, but this pales in comparison. We'll link to Andy Kroll's excellent profile on Rowe in addition to this, just for some reading there. Mm-hmm. This could be a fun convention, Betsy.
It's going to be so fun. It's historic. It's historic. It's like it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So, it's awesome.
So
really
I want to switch a little bit and talk about the Dem side here. I've been covering Bernie Sanders a lot lately, and almost exclusively, and his hunt for superdelegates. And earlier in the week, I wrote a story on how he pitches superdelegates, which is unusual for Mr. Brash Bernie. He sort of just kind of like floats the idea, kind of like a middle schooler asking someone to a dance for the first time. It's like, oh, we could sort of do this. He or select members of his team sort of like will throw the idea out or check in, and sometimes will set the said superdelegate up with Sanders for a call just to let them know what they're all about in case they haven't seen any posters or read the news or haven't been active in politics.
In case they just escaped from a bunker where they'd been kidnapped for the last 20 years.
It has not been, I mean, he's still trailing dramatically in superdelegate math. The campaign over the past weekend announced they had 39 superdelegates. Clinton has a lot more. But the interesting thing that I want to throw out on this is twofold. One is Sanders supporters are starting to get increasingly aggressive about courting superdelegates. And Clinton superdelegates have started complaining that Sanders supporters are harassing them, calling their house, all that stuff. Yeah. And we
that
reported,
is not surprising at all.
Right. And then the other thing is that the irony of this, I think, is Sanders, and I have a theory that he pitching superdelegates is a little difficult for him because they are the party elite that play a big role in deciding the nominee, which is exactly at its very crudest core what Sanders is against. A privileged, powerful elite making choices for all of the people. So, so it's ironic now that he definitely needs those people to go on, and he has to vow that as he wins more, that'll happen. The system is not letting him do that. Even though he's won 8 of 9 last contests, he's still...
it's not helping him... It's not significantly helping him widen his delegate lead.
Momentum.
He and Hillary tied in delegates in Wyoming, even though he beat her by almost 10 points there. Yeah, so it's
it's actually closer than I thought, but yeah.
It's interesting what you're saying about the superdelegates too, and kind of the discomfort that Sanders has to feel courting them. I mean, it's like he could opt out of having a super PAC, and he can talk in every single speech about how he doesn't have a super PAC. He's not taking outside money, but he can't opt out of courting superdelegates. It's just not something he can do. It's not how the rules work. And of course, a lot of these superdelegates, because they're party loyalists, care a ton about down ballot races too. Yep. I mean, if you're
and Sanders has just started fundraising for down ballot races,
and the down ballot races he's fundraising for are progressives running in primaries, which does not endear one to the party elite. He's been fundraising for Zephyr Teachout, who primaried Governor Cuomo in New York. It's interesting. And of course, Hillary, part of the reason that she's behind Sanders in fundraising is because she's been doing so much fundraising for the DNC, for the party. So Hillary is the consummate party person, the consummate team player. Yeah. And Sanders is the opposite of that. And now he's sort of having to deal.
I know the betting is that the GOP convention is going to be a lot of fun and the most chaotic thing ever. And it's true. There's no evidence to suggest that. But I don't want, I want to argue here that there is no reason that we should forget the Democratic convention too. This is pivotal here in that both of these conventions are going to be bonkers.
Bonkers! That's exactly the word I was thinking.
To quote Ellie Goulding, anything could happen here.
Also though, speaking of the Democratic convention, in 2012, the last election cycle, the Republican convention had its own drama and excitement because of the Ron Paul people who were chanting "fuck you tyrants" on the convention floor, and
that
who
was
made
a nightmare.
a huge scene. And the support that Ron Paul had and the level of organization Ron Paul had at the 2012 convention is a small fraction of the support and energy and organizing that Bernie Sanders is going to have at the 2016 Dem convention. So there is every indicator that the Dem convention is going to be bananas, which is awesome because it could have been so boring, but it's not going to be boring. And I'm really, really excited about it. I can't wait.
How are you feeling about our democratic system?
Well, I mean, don't ask me those questions. See, here's the thing, is that party politics are not inherently democratic. They don't have to be democratic. For a long time, party bosses would actually pick their nominees literally by sitting in back rooms and having conversations.
That's where
and
the
people
backroom
didn't even
deals phrase, that's where the concept comes from.
Right, it wasn't democratic at all. There was no pretense of it being a democratic process. It doesn't have to be a democratic process. First Amendment free association rights means these parties have a right to exist. They have a right to operate however they want to operate. They can do whatever they want, If they decided that, the way they were going to pick the Republican presidential nominee was that the only delegates who could vote were delegates who were born on Thursday, they could do that. The RNC Rules Committee could make something like that the rules. They could do whatever they want. I think people getting really exercised about party rules not being fair. I mean, yes, obviously it makes sense to be upset about that. It's completely understandable. It's a completely valid complaint. Activists have every reason to argue that the way parties pick nominees should be democratic. Yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's obvious. But people forget that party elections are not governmental elections. They're not they're clubs.
Well,
they're club society.
That's
they're,
the
they're,
complaint among a lot of the Sanders supporters, that this is not a democratic system.
Yeah, it's not a democratic
but like,
system.
She's still ahead by 2 million votes, but...
Yeah, and she's still going to win pledged delegates. She's still going to win delegates that are bound. It's even if you took superdelegates out. If you took superdelegates out, it would obviously be way, way, way closer.
Right.
But current projections...
The irony of all of this is that I've heard some GOP operatives mumble about how they wish they had superdelegates now. I mean, these are operatives who despise Trump.
Yeah,
but
right.
Like,
that's not a bad idea.
We should have done that.
Why don't we have that?
But they'll be singing a different tune tomorrow.
Selection ever. It's
so
good.
Betsy, I wanted to close out with one thing really short, and then I have to run into a meeting I'm late for. But so with Paul Manafort and Rick Wiley, Scott Walker, his former boss, has endorsed Ted Cruz. Do you think there's a Trump tribe growing, sort of like the Tea Party or something? They're just going to be Trump operatives that are going to be blacklisted in some places, but are going to be super sought after in other places down the line, one way or another. Like, there's a consulting firm called Jamestown that was blacklisted by some of the national committees, right? Because they were key in helping upstart primary challengers. Do you think that's going to happen here?
Probably.
Manafort?
I mean, people are talking explicitly about blacklisting. People are making literal lists. So yes, I would think so. But I think the important caveat is that Trump has shown that there is a massive number of potential Republican primary voters who want what Trump is, and we have numbers. We're going to have their contact information, and we're going to have home addresses and voter registration, public information,
one of the most,
and candidates are going to want to court them.
I always wonder
you'd be stupid if all you care about is winning elections, and you're running in Massachusetts or Alabama or upstate New York or wherever. Why on earth would you not use the Trump playbook? I mean, from a purely strategic perspective, and candidates are going to see that, and they're going to say, screw this. I don't want to deal with having to kowtow to the niceties and mores of the Republican Party establishment and East Coast media. Screw that. I'm going to be the Trump of upstate New York. And when that happens, and that will happen, all these Trump operatives are going to be in high demand. It's going to be just a fact.
Yeah.
I would think. Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows? I don't really know what I'm talking about.
I think I think infighting is good for business for a lot of operatives, because if you last long, and it's the same on the Dem side. All of Sanders' people are going to be really sought after the fact.
Totally. Primaries are good for operatives.
Good for us, too.
I know. It's
something to write about. All right, Betsy, thanks very much for your time here. This is interesting.
It's been real.
Keep covering the dictators. Let's do drinks next week or something. I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.